Thursday, 7:30 a.m. First item of business is the proposed mobility small cell sites. And Eric, it's yours to lead off.
Okay, this is picking up where we left off back in September, and these were not necessarily specifically to approve or disapprove individual sites as they are now. Where this really started was we do have some wireless sites that we're seeking to locate within the city right of way, and we've kind of gone back and forth as to whether or not we need to pursue a franchise agreement with the city. So that's kind of where the discussion started, and at that time I know we talked about the basics of what these sites do as far as data backhaul, some limited voice communication, supplemental to the existing network. They're not full-blown cell sites, they are supplementary. Specifically, this particular project started with Sprint as the main carrier. We were also in negotiations with two other major carriers that I'm not going to mention yet because I don't think we have anything penned with them yet. But at that time, it was requested that provide some propagation maps, also some photo sims, just so you can kind of see what the equipment looks like. At the time, we had only one site planned in the city. We now have three. At that time, that particular site was a 120-foot pole. Now what we have is three sites that are either 50 or 60 feet. I will note too that on one of these locations, the one that's on Tremont, I realized that is actually going to have to move. Because we had this, Mark Dorsey and I had this discussion back in the summer that that's in the middle of a road project, or the road widening coming. So it would be somewhere in that general area, although not that specific location. Do have photo sims and engineering drawings for all three of the proposed sites, and we have propagation maps for two of the three, and I regret that we did not get an updated one for the one over off Lund Drive. There was a little mistake there because I had been provided one back in September, but that was for the 120-foot tower, not the 60-foot. So that's kind of where, I guess, where we're picking up again is just how do we proceed with the city? Because we had initially talked about going through on a site-by-site basis. If we have multiple sites, is it better to have a franchise agreement? That's really, what does the city want? What does the city feel is the best course of action here?
What's the timing? I mean, in a perfect world, if this was all to come together for you, but when would you move towards construction, and when could these be operational?
We have, I mean, from the point at which we get an approved permit, however long that takes by jurisdiction, we shoot to have these things under construction within 30 days. I wouldn't swear at this point that that's religious. I could say definitely 30. It could be longer. Just depends on what the overall workload is around the region, because we are operating, well, we are nationwide,
right?
And so
yeah,
yeah,
that's part of my question. I mean, you look at Port Orchard, and we're a pretty small city, so I'm just curious on like demand needs here versus maybe more of your more urban centers where I don't see or hear people really having capacity issues. That's correct.
Well, yeah, and I'm not in Port Orchard. I'm in Gig Harbor. I can tell you, I certainly do, and I usually have those in the privacy of my own home, which is probably a good idea because of what I say. But a lot of it is things that I am not able to, pick up, or I get anything from drop or text messages that don't go through, internet that freezes up, things like that. Just things that I try to Google or look up, and I just cannot get them. And the problem is just going to get worse. Well, first of all, well, the equipment we're putting on here is really geared toward 5G,
Okay.
which is the upcoming,
Yep.
which is going to be a lot of the, the things that we deal with remotely. Down the road, I'm not quite sure how far we are away from, having, the remote driverless, the driverless vehicles and all that sort of thing in this area. I know that they're being tried out in other areas. Those rely on having all that additional bandwidth, not to mention everybody, operating everything from their lights to their, their baby monitors on their cell phones, that sort of thing. So the idea is to have the capacity available before people start having problems, because you don't want to get behind the curve. And as these additional technologies become available, which are, obviously, as we've seen in the past, they come on fast and furious. You can't flip a switch and all of a sudden have capacity for it in the space of 30 days or even a year, because the infrastructure has to be there first.
And then what's the range? How far, like, as far as expanding coverage on these
This is,
50-foot towers?
if you want to, that kind of varies based on the height and the topography. That's kind of what these propagation maps show. This is what the couple that we have. So, again, very much of it is dependent upon the taller the facility, the more coverage you're going to have. Bigger facilities typically also will put larger equipment on, stronger, like higher wattage radio equipment, receivers and transmitters. These 50 and 60 foot poles that we're talking about, that's as short as we can go in a jurisdiction and still be able to have, these do actually pick up additional voice call signals, and they do actually have microwave transmitters on there. The smaller units literally are much more passive, and all they do is pick up data and they stream it back. They'll tie into the existing fiber network, run it back to the existing full-blown cell sites in the area, and augment that. These do both.
Yeah, I was just curious, just because I know, like, our largest center of growth right now from a residential perspective is out west of town, and it appears it's outside of your coverage area.
Is it within town? See, this is not like a plan for the entire area, because we certainly have sites that are in Kitsap County that are just outside the city
Yeah,
limits.
this is in the city, but not to say you're not working with the site very nearby in the county that might address those issues.
Yeah, we have, gosh, at this one, we have, I'm not sure how many sites we have in Kitsap, but I know that I've looked at some other ones that are in Kitsap, like there's one I think out of Jackson, which is actually a county site. So that's over toward that side of town. I have not looked, I mean, I couldn't tell you where all of them are. I know there's some others as you head out toward the ferry. I know that Kitsap is my third largest jurisdiction as far as bulk, behind Pierce County and Tacoma. So, we're my limited area, which is pretty much South Sound and Olympic Peninsula. But again, as far as getting these units built, the gating issues for us, much more time is invested in the permitting process, and before that, obviously, if there's a franchise agreement involved, sometimes those come quickly, sometimes those take 6 months or a year to hammer out.
Right.
It just depends on who you're dealing with. So that's really, from my standpoint, those are the lead time issues that I have. I think if you have, regardless of which way you decide to go, once either you've determined that you want to go through a straight permitting process as it exists with the city now, or we have a franchise agreement in place, then I'd say most places you usually can get something permitted in 30 to 60 days, and then we would hope to have that under construction within 30 days following.
So have you looked at alternatives to these sites that maybe aren't necessarily in right-of-way, or?
No, that is actually not really part of our business model because these are not full-blown cell sites and we cannot, these are supplemental. Number one, they don't have any ground equipment, they don't require these big compounds. We don't have outside wiring on it. At the same time, because they are supplemental and we're not a provider, the revenue stream certainly, it just does not support being able to go and lease property for these. They are, you have a small footprint here. The largest units we have about a, about 4-foot diameter footprint.
What's the brick web's ass?
I would have to go, and I think they, obviously with different units, I can get you specs on any individual.
One of the concerns is we don't allow, we've got a undergrounding ordinance as far as utility infrastructure.
Right.
It's supposed to all be underground, and PSC can't put additional poles in our right of way.
Right, understanding that, and I guess the difference is with, obviously with wireless, there is no option to put wireless equipment in the ground because it has to be above
But if it's
ground.
gonna be in the right of way, we need to be able to, if a car hits it like a light pole,
Right.
it's gotta be able to shear, and when it comes down, it's not gonna kill somebody.
Okay, I know that they are engineered to break away. I am not, I can get you the specs on these if that's something you're interested in.
That'd be a concern for us.
So-
Okay. And obviously, as part of the permitting process too, when we cite these, we're trying to take into account, I assume that the city uses you go by the washed out standards, the clear zone standards. So that's always taken into account as well.
Yeah, it looked like the Lund Avenue project was within the between the sidewalk and the street in the landscape buffer, which is certainly not meeting the WashDOT standard for a setback.
Yeah, I'm not sure that when they did that photo sim there, that they did that correctly because as I plotted it out,
Same with Bethlehem.
I thought it was actually in between the sidewalk and the parking lot. Again, with these though, that's, these points on the ground, we can certainly move them to a point where if they're, let's say, we require a 15-foot clear zone and the coordinates here have it at 12, we can certainly move it back. Typically when I don't select, I kind of tweak the sites, I don't necessarily select them up front. We have a group in California that does that, but then I come out and I say, no, it really needs to be over here, or you need to slide back here. I try to keep these to the very rear of the right-of-way, whatever the right-of-way is, and be sure that the front of that pole meets, or the portion of the pole nearest the right-of-way meets the clear zone requirements.
One of the-
Basically, two questions. One is, here's those selected sites that are on our major corridors. Have you ever looked at or considered something on our secondary roads? Tremont, as an example, we're spending millions of dollars literally to improve that corridor through there, not only for traffic flow, but aesthetics. And I gotta say, these are not the most beautiful places to look at, which leads me to my second question. Do you have anything that can deal with the aesthetics of these things so that they don't look like an industrial piece of steel hanging on
Well,
the roadway?
there are a couple of designs that are a little more streamlined where more of the equipment is actually within the pole, because there's not necessarily a whole lot we can do about on these shorter units, the canistered antennas. We do have on the electrical boxes and the UV relays, the radio units, the big boxes here that are on the outside. We do have designs where that is all on the interior of the pole. What that does obviously require is that the pole has a larger diameter.
Well, as an example, one that we dealt with previously is there's one on 166 as you go west out of the city that is a big black hole. And that's actually a cell tower.
Yep.
But for everybody driving by, it looks like a big black hole. It's got a big flag hanging on it.
Right.
That's far more
So you're talking
acceptable to look
more
at.
stealth designs.
Yeah, exactly. It's much better than looking at a piece of industrial
Yeah,
Which goes back to my first question, if it has to be a piece of steel, can we move it off these major corridors, which is our
yeah,
entrance to
if
the
there's
city?
right of way available, we're not nailed to one, this is just, similar to other, wireless sites, you have a search ring within which you can locate, and I do have access to those, and I actually, for reasons, whether they be aesthetics or because there may be, I have a lot of cases where, units that we're intending to locate within a county get placed by initially along a, wash dot right of way or something like that, or, the type of one that someone decided they wouldn't be ideal. This looks like a great place to put it until you realize it's on the shoulder of 16, So then I go out, that's kind of where I come in, I start saying, no, you really need to be over here, and come down and I look at all the right-of-way widths and actually go out to the areas. That's actually my background, is actually.
Is that Sedgwick site, is that our right of way? Or is that the state?
It is, but I was gonna point out, we have a pending application for a new development on that site, and so I think that's right in the middle of a driveway. And that was gonna bring up my other question, which is, when private development is proposed, since the primary purpose of the right-of-way is ingress and egress to the properties along a right-of-way, who pays to move a pole?
Well, going off my own experience, I guess that could either be written into an agreement. In my experience, having worked for a county, it was always, if we're located, if the utility is located in the right-of-way, then it's the utility's obligation to move the equipment. That's obviously not me advocating for mobility here, but that's typically the way I understand it. That's always been the way to understand it works. If you're expanding the road and we're on a private easement, you pay for it. If we're in your right of way and you're expanding, then you pay for it.
So is the base of the 53-foot tower 4 feet wide because you're locating all the cabinetry inside that? And so that if you were to make that exterior underground, you'd have a much more narrow diameter pole?
Well, the 50-footer should not be 4 feet at the base. That one.
Well, as an example, is that the concept?
The concept would be, that if you have, the ones we have that have narrower footprints, part of the reason that we have that is that all the equipment is on the outside. So basically the equipment needs to be redesigned in such a way that it can be, because literally that box cannot fit within as is cannot fit within.
What about putting it in cabinetry underground?
That is a good question. I know that we, in some cases, place it on the ground, although we really hate to do that. We don't like to do that, but there are some places that actually want it there. As far as putting it in a vault, the radio equipment, I would have to ask about that. I know we have a variety of different designs. I have not heard about having any vaulted radio or electrical equipment though. However, again, back to what you were talking about, as far as placing this in on a right-of-way that's not right on a main drag. As long as there's sufficient right-of-way there, I have no problem with that. That's
What about
kind of my personal preference, because I know that there's not going to be nearly as much work there. There's not going to be, obviously on a main road, you're going to be.
It seems like these three locations you've chosen, I could see in the very near future, all of them having to be moved one way or another. And they're all in areas that we're looking to widen or expand.
Well,
It's interesting.
It's gotta be streamlined, we're
Right.
just starting.
Yeah, and that one we were aware of. I apologize for the fact that this was not, that nobody selected a new site out there.
When you were looking at these sites, did you look at alternatives to a standalone tower, such as co-location or mounting on other structures?
The nature of these the transport sites, the very fact that they're placed, being supplemental, part of this is to fill holes, gaps that are in existing coverage, or where there's insufficient coverage for the upcoming needs. So those two things don't really go together, because that's the whole point of placing it someplace off of a.
I thought it was also additional or supplemental capacity.
What it does, is that if you have they're what we had. The microcells do nothing but data. Now, the 3 sites we have planned for this, for the city are both, they're not microcells, they're what we call macros. So that actually picks up additional data, but also provides for additional talk bandwidth. And that's actually what the microwave antennas are on there for. So those are not something that are really co-locatable, because that actually what those microwave antennas do is they are broadcasting, they're sending signal back to existing towers without having to lay any additional fiber in the ground, tear up the sidewalk, tear up the road. That's the advantage of microwave.
What about mounting on other, I think somebody mentioned water towers, those kinds of things?
Those, again, that's something that you can, that's something that's, you could do with, say, mini macros. Those can go anywhere, or not mini macros, but minis, microcells, as they say. Those can be mounted on bridges and water tanks, and we do a lot on existing utility poles. I mean, we've got a whole slew we're doing over in Tacoma on street lamps. But again, that's the nature of this. By having the wattage on the macros is about 8 times what they are on minis. So you go from 5 watts to 40. You have all this additional equipment that needs to go with it, the microwave, the transmission. So it is not, from an engineering standpoint, it is not something that's practical to do for the equipment that we have.
I'm assuming you folks did an analysis to determine where the weak spots were, be able to
Yes.
select these points.
Again,
Is
this,
there data available that we could look at? 'Cause and I know nothing about this stuff, but I do know that we have a cell tower, we have 2 cell towers less than a mile away. One going west and one going kind of south.
yeah, this,
On Tremont, I'm speaking specifically Tremont now, and 2 big towers relatively close to the one on Tremont. Capacity is certainly an issue, I can understand that, but if it's
Yeah.
to fill a void that's not being covered.
right, and a lot of it is, some of this is, there are areas where it's literally a dead spot or something like that, where the coverage is just poor. The reality is, for most of these today, it's so many people are using devices is that it's just like trying to pull, if you have regardless of how many towers you got, it's like if you have a water main that's 24 inches and you keep adding more and more houses that are pulling off, there's a point at which you're just not getting enough.
I understand that.
So that's kind of what we're doing, so it's kind of a way of expanding the overall capacity. Because the use of wireless for everything is just going up exponentially every year. I mean, everybody, obviously, you probably sit in a council meeting and everybody's on their phones and doing anything from, whereas in the past it might be someone like Googling something in text. Now people are watching movies and flipping their lights on and off and checking on their kids at home. And,
No, I understand all that.
so that's kind of what these
Part of it is, I know enough about technology just to be dangerous, and I would be the first to admit, but I work with the transit system, we're in the midst of replacing our mobile radio system from analog to digital, and one of the things with newer technology is that we're able to essentially double the capacity of our system by going to newer equipment, so I don't know if that same kind of approach has been applied to some of the cell towers that have been around for a few years, if they've been upgrading their equipment to deal with the capacity.
Yeah, for any individual site within the city, I couldn't tell you, because they're all, I'm sure where you know that, you have one entity owns the tower, which may or may not be a provider. It could be just a tower company that leases space, and then as you go down, your best spots at the top, and then they get less and less and less valuable as you go down. so everybody's got their own, each one of those carriers is showing its own,
Application map.
right, exactly. And I don't know that any one of them knows exactly what the other one's got.
Isn't that kind of the concept of your company is that you provide a common location that you can lease out to the.
This is
various
something, right.
carriers?
This is primarily being, the initial stage here, because we simply didn't go out there and say, let's build a bunch of towers and hope somebody locates on them. We did have, obviously, Sprint being the big player that was behind, being able to make sure that we have a client on board for every place. And again, I know we're in negotiations with two of the other three major carriers right now, because what that's going to do for them is that's also going to, and that's part of the reason that you have in these, the canisters out there, you have space there for additional units in there, for additional carriers to utilize. So we are kind of just, we're almost like a, I don't want to say contractor, but that's kind of the concept where we're giving you additional capacity without you having to, without you owning it.
Right.
As the, right.
Do we know how many Sprint users there are within this coverage area?
I have no idea.
I'm just wondering how many of our residences would really benefit versus.
Well, it's not just understanding too that it's not just Sprint users. It's that it's just like any place else. If you either have insufficient coverage or no coverage from your existing carrier, you don't lose your call. Well, hopefully you don't. It just flips over and it will be picked up by another antenna on there through another carrier, but that's part of how they make their money is they just bill that back and say that basically he who has the most capacity gets the most revenue. So it's not a matter of,
So any.
every third tower has a Sprint, or I've got T-Mobile.
So a T-Mobile could communicate through that tower. That's what you're
Yes.
saying.
So basically,
Or Verizon.
yeah, because what it is like if I'm out, say I'm sitting in traffic, say I'm on, locked in a traffic jam on I-5 or something like that, and I've got T-Mobile, and we're all stopped, nobody's going anywhere, everybody's getting on their phones. At a certain point, T-Mobile runs out of bandwidth. I can still make a call, but it's going to default. Okay, so it kind of goes down.
Got
You
it.
say, okay, who can I flip over to?
Understand.
And then once you flip over, though, it's like now T-Mobile has to pay
Right.
Verizon for the time that's kind of how that works.
Okay.
How's it going with the other cities that you're working with?
It's mixed bag. I'm happy to say things have taken some very positive turns. I know we've finally got something finalized with Tacoma, which has been a long time coming. We've got some other cities where actually they're anxious to have us there, but we have not been able to get the franchise agreements through simply because right now there are so many agreements we've got going with various cities, counties, obviously agreements, pole attachment agreements with utilities. They're kind of being prioritized based upon, because obviously we have to have our attorneys look at them. They are getting prioritized based upon number of sites. So if you get a lot of sites, if you're Seattle, yeah, you're getting work done. If you're Tacoma, yeah, we've got attorneys to throw at it. If you're Winlock, not necessarily. On the other hand, but I shouldn't have said Winlock anyway. They're actually a city I'm working with that actually doesn't require a franchise. And there's some.
What other cities are you working with?
Me personally, I've got easily 36 jurisdictions.
You working in Gig Harbor then?
Gig Harbor is actually part of a group. They and Bremerton and Puyallup are three of my cities that are all working with a consortium of cities on. That's actually mini cells, microcells. But I think that agreement's coming to a conclusion. That's something that started before I even came on here. As far as other cities, locally, I mean, obviously, Tacoma, Port Angeles, Aberdeen. And I did like it though, I did actually get started with Bremerton some time back, and they decided to deviate for a little bit. I will be, we'll have, again, Gig Harbor, Puyallup. Tumwater, I could certainly send you, are you looking for references or just
Well,
curious?
it's models to, so really, just to kind of wrap this up here,
Yeah.
because of the time this morning is, legislature was working hard on this issue with the industry and with the Association of Washington Cities. That bill seems to lost traction. I think the governor might bring it back alive to kind of provide some guidance. We're a small city.
Right.
And we got a lot of co-development and other issues. I would, at this time, I don't know that we have the capacity right now to put together a franchise agreement. And that's kind of where we're fishing with that question.
Okay.
What other jurisdictions have done this? Because we're probably gonna take a look at how they did it and, I don't wanna say steal, but we're
I
gonna
borrow.
we're gonna borrow or model.
Do what we do
Yeah.
best.
Model's good.
Model after how they got there, in the short run, if you're needing to move forward, I think you can look at these site by site. I think the concerns we have are aesthetics. They're gonna be the capacity. We have an undergrounding ordinance,
Yeah, and the other,
putting some of this cabinetry and electronics involved is probably gonna be pretty desirable to us. And
Along with looking at potentially other locations.
Yeah.
Whether we're making it part of a building, or a building footprint, or putting it on a back, not on an arterial, or probably, it's kind of what I'm gathering from the group here this morning. I know you need to be as close as you can to that fiber. Those fiber runs are running down those arterials.
yes, then that's, again,
That's
obviously,
part
you
of
wanna
it.
you wanna be where your customers are, where the need is. That said, that, going off on a side street or something like that, I've been pretty good about being able to find, because I've been doing this site acquisition for a long time myself. I've put these things down some back alleys and unopened rights of way and dead ends and, things like that.
Matt,
And obviously we're
stealth,
obviously-
John mentioned, the stealth site,
Yeah,
It's gotta be out there. If it has to be on Tremont, it's, all of a sudden, my goodness, now we've got this beautiful flagpole that everybody thinks we've done this public benefit to everybody, but it's that, and it's, happens to be,
Yeah,
one of
for these, we're a little bit limited on stealthing as far as like putting in branches and things like that. When we paint it, we can try to, again, enclose some of the equipment, we can move it off on a side street, but as
So
far
I guess presenting some alternatives to
Yeah,
staff.
that's the kind of stuff, what you can do
Yeah.
to soften the look of this thing would be
Okay, so we gotta,
greatly appreciated.
all right, so, biggest steps.
So I think it's logical to assume that if you can find right of way with higher elevation, then you're looking at a shorter tower.
Maybe, maybe not, because if you're farther from the target, you may
Right,
lose it back,
right.
that,
Yeah, given that,
yeah.
All things being equal.
yeah.
As far as agreements go, and I know you want to wrap this up, we do have a couple of template agreements of, we have a shorter form.
I guess I'm not as interested in what you guys want, I'm interested in what the other jurisdictions have approved.
Okay. Well, some of those are things we provide as, here's a sample of what we've worked out with some.
I don't think there's any harm in providing us some approved agreements. If
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about.
Whatever Tacoma adopted.
Yeah,
And I'll tell you what we do, is that I guess our official line is, we don't provide that to you, but you can certainly, I can tell you who we've dealt with, and you can talk to them directly, and that kind of takes
Give
us
us the
out.
cities that you have agreement, we'll contact the cities.
It's a public
Okay.
records request.
So my other two
We'll be one of those
questions,
guys.
what is the term that you're looking for any one pole in there? Are you expecting to get 20 years out of one of these, or?
That,
um,
I
One of
mean-
our sections of code talks
basically just want to be treated on par with any other utility. So I don't know what, when PSE places facilities in the right of way, I mean, what do they get? I mean, they get rotating 5-year terms, 20-year terms, eternity.
I mean, to be honest, right now, if PSC wanted to come and put utilities on the street, they couldn't put poles up.
Okay.
They have to
Well-
put it in the ground.
Right.
You know, and it's no different than the phone company or the cable company, everybody in our city has to put the utility. The only thing that can be done out there with a pole is replacing
Right.
an existing pole. Because we've probably 6-7 years ago passed an undergrounding ordinance that all the utility infrastructure has to. be
And that's
placed in the
very,
ground.
very common, you know. And that's
And in
what-
fact, aren't we, as part of our Fremont
Project.
project,
We're
is
spending
undergrounding a
$2
bunch of
million
things.
undergrounding all of that infrastructure.
And main transmission lines.
Transmission lines and everything to go in the ground.
Oh, yeah, like I said, that's not uncommon at all. That's probably 50% of the jurisdictions I talk to. Again, that's kind of where we always have to
So if
come to
it's
some
got-
sort of agreement because there's no.
something's gotta be out of the ground,
Yes.
we don't want it to look like a cruise missile.
So, my other question was gonna be, what is the where do you do environmental review and public outreach in the process of putting up a pole? Is there a SEPA determination for each pole that you wanna put up under an agreement, or how have you done this in other jurisdictions in terms of
That,
informing the public and?
typically that's determined by the jurisdiction. I mean, there's no, I mean, because we're talking about, we're not ripping out a bunch of trees or anything like this. This is essentially just a pretty large utility pole. So if there are SEPA requirements, you know.
Well, we haven't installed any of these, and so that's why I'm asking, what's your experience been in putting one of these up in Tacoma or somewhere else?
Again, it really just kind of depends on whatever the jurisdictional regulations are, unless we're going into some sort of a state regulated area, like placing it within like a stream buffer or something like that, where they require a SEPA. Then it's just been kind of on a case-by-case basis. I mean, typically, well, I can't even tell you if there is a typical case.
Because I think when we do a cell tower through a conditional use permit process, you're always gonna have a SEPA determination on the construction of a cell tower, but if it's in the right of way, I'm not sure. I'd have to research.
Right, and there's a lot more involved in building a regular cell site too, because there's a lot more disturbance and you have ground, you have buildings and ground equipment and parking areas and whatnot, so you have drainage involved.
So we gotta wrap up.
Okay.
It's our understanding you're gonna come back with alternatives, not only in terms of location, but tower types and.
See what we
You mentioned
can-
streamlined towers?
Yeah,
Okay.
that can certainly.
Just get those to staff, I don't think it needs to come back.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so at this point then, from the subcommittee standpoint then, is this just pending further submissions from mobility so there's no,
I think-
nothing for the council to act upon at this point?
Right.
Pending further.
Right, I think your submission will trigger more discussion
Okay.
with this group,
Okay.
and then that would,
We can reach out to
Ultimately
other
lead-
jurisdictions and just do some more
Yeah.
due diligence on our end.
And we'd really like to see something from the legislature to provide us a
Absolutely.
framework, because that,
Yeah, that
It's
solves a
clear
lot,
path
but it hasn't,
Right.
it seems to be on hold right now. They're dealing with something called malaria.
It'd be something a lot more fun.
thank you.
So,
Thank
all
you.
right,
Thanks,
well,
Eric, for
good
coming
to
in.
see you again, and I guess
Got it.
I'll look forward to, hopefully it won't be 6 months this time.
That's right.
Interesting stuff. All right, the next agenda item is multifamily tax exemption on overlook apartments.
yeah, so when we passed the tax abatement ordinance in 2016, we were working on outlining the map of what areas were gonna be included and excluded, and we only had one comment, I think, on the map boundaries, and that was to include the area up behind the movie theater off of Mile Hill. And the person who made that request has now applied approval, but we just wanted to make sure that some of the council members knew where this was coming from, and if you guys had questions or wanted additional information, we could provide that in advance.
One quick question is there anything in this that is outside of what we contemplated when we adopted this?
Not at all.
Then I think it's exactly what we were looking for.
I had a conversation Monday when I first met. I mean, these guys are chomping at the bit. Their permits are all ready to be picked up. They can't pick their permit up though until this agreement's in place. Otherwise, they got the cart ahead of the horse. They assure me these will be the nicest apartments in the south end of the county. The views up there are phenomenal. The affordable housing component is on, I believe, on the lower floor where the views don't exist. And, you know, the upper floors, they said,
And
are just,
how many units are they,
Yeah.
are we total?
It's 2 buildings, 38 units, so 19 per building.
they are interested in connecting with, they're marketing these obviously with high-speed ferry and connecting to Seattle.
Smart.
Yeah, how they can, they see that the lot down there at Annapolis is quite full, and I said I agreed with them, and how they could connect this development seamlessly with transit, so I'm just planting that seed out there since there's somebody in the room.
You said 38 units?
Yes.
Whether it's a, a bus is,
The
because it's not too far off the rough route, or if with it's walkable and,
But a pedestrian path somehow to connect with.
yeah.
Isn't
up
there,
above
there's a
Exactly.
pickup at the Kmart
It's a
site,
Kmart
right?
site.
So, yeah, this goes right down Orlando and
It does, so there's sidewalk.
only,
Yeah, only's there, there's no.
Only in
so it's a pretty short walk,
Porcelain and.
Yeah.
only in Orlando.
Well, even if there was an additional stop,
That's easy.
at Orlando or something on the way down the hill or something, could, that's who they are seeing as their target market, and they're looking at it.
So, 7 to 8 units then would be the affordable units.
Yeah, do they talk about that in here?
20%.
20, it's minimum 20%.
So it's 8.
No fewer than.
So anyway, they're excited, had we not expanded this, they had a single-family dwelling development that was just not penciling at all.
That's actually on a separate site just uphill from this.
Okay, so they've got.
They
so
still have that entitlement.
Yes, okay, yeah. So there's another phase. They said that this project doesn't pencil, and they're seeing this moving, wouldn't have moved forward if we hadn't to put this tool in place.
And they're assuring us that these are gonna be pretty nice.
That's what they're telling me. They said these will be the nicest apartments in the
Yeah,
South End.
the architectural rendering that came in with their plans, it looks like it's a pretty nice looking building.
Good. We have enough multifamily right here, but if we can get some upscale
Upscale.
multifamily, then that's plus.
Great. That's exactly what we were.
Did you have one more item?
What we've been to before, it's worth keeping.
You said so. You know what? I should bring that up to land
Like
use.
them together.
In the last couple of days, and I said, yeah, you should, and it wasn't on the agenda.
Maybe the McCormick guidelines?
Yeah, okay, but we want to talk about
Yeah,
that briefly.
just real quick, since we have a few more minutes, I think we've mentioned to you that the McCormick Woods developers have been looking at the single-family design standards that we've been talking about, and they've been trying to figure out what is going to work for them out there. And at the same time, they also have a challenge because when they had their preliminary plat approved by the county, it was under county zoning, and now they're under city zoning, and our setbacks are slightly different than what the county allowed. And so they're asking us to allow, they like some of the things that are in our code, but they also want some of the things that they had with the county, and it's hard for them to get either or. So we initially took to the planning commission an idea to create a parallel R8 zone, which would be like an R8B, as opposed to the R8 that we have, that would have just slightly different setbacks and lot coverage standards that would more closely match the product type that they're trying to build. The planning commission sort of was uncomfortable with the idea of creating a special zone just for this one project. And so we've gone back and forth with the developer, and they've said, really the only thing we care about are these setbacks. And so if we just amend our R8 setbacks slightly to allow what they want, I think they're happy.
And do it citywide.
And side, it's 15 feet or the average of the adjacent setback, so that the house isn't sticking out like a sore thumb from the adjacent properties. And we'd like to propose that to the planning commission along with the single-family design guidelines, which I think we've ironed out. We've softened a few things that they wanted the ability for 3-car garages. Our code wasn't going to allow that. So we worked with them, and they said that they think they can live with what we're proposing for all of McCormick, so that we would just have a citywide single-family standard, and that's going to go to the planning commission here on the 4th. They have some urgency on fixing the setback issue because they want to start building houses, and they would like to build them to the setbacks that they had envisioned.
How long is it gonna take to get this changed?
I think we could potentially have it at the second meeting of April for the setback issue, and whether we want to do the design guidelines at that time or wait and put them into the Unified Development Code. I think the architectural standards aren't urgent, it's the setback.
Well, but I think we want to bring it all together, and because the stick, the industry isn't, building industry isn't gonna like is our standards, that we're not gonna allow the T111 on the front of a house anymore. The garage can't, the side of the garage can't face an arterial street, those type of things, and the backward fence things that we're seeing out there. They're not gonna like that stuff.
Did
but-
we ever get an official position from anybody on that?
We
No.
haven't gotten any written comments. We reached out to them and said, what do you think works and what would you like to see? And they said, well, send us a proposal and we'll comment on it. And that was in October, and we've never gotten a comment.
The carrot to this, if we bring it all together at once, now we're gonna give you, we're asking
Plus
for
minus
this.
is included.
We're gonna give you some better setbacks, we're gonna allow the 3-car garage thing, but we don't want it T111 and the garage being the most prominent feature of the house from
Makes sense.
Main Street. So I think we've got a good, and I wasn't comfortable with it, and then the planning commission jumped right on it, was creating separate rules and special rules for McCormick Woods. Let's, if it's good for there, why isn't it good for the rest of our city?
One of the things that I've seen with the 3-car garage is that there's some modulation between the two and that third, so that the third is set back even a couple of feet from the two.
I've seen that designs
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
We could maybe look at adding something, I guess we've got the public hearing notice to the paper that gets published tomorrow, so we need to have something to show the public tomorrow, but we can develop a kind of an alternative for the planning commission to consider at the hearing that they may want to recommend. So anyway, that's just
Okay.
for your information, and we're going to try to have a setback issue before you in April. And there's a handful of other little cleanup items that we've found. There's a few footnotes that actually are listed, but they aren't cited anywhere on our table, and it's just striking some extraneous information. I think there's one or two other minor correction that we have a street right-of-way setback that applies to the front side, and if you have an alley loading garage, you also have to set back from the alley. And so most cities have like a 2-foot or a 0-foot alley setback so that the garage can be directly off the alley. We have a 15-foot alley setback, and so we wanted to fix that at the same time while we got that section open.
So once
We
again,
also have an interesting situation, and to be perfectly transparent, my property is one that is bordered on 3 sides by right of way. And even though 1.5 isn't developed right away, it's still right away. So if I were to build, my understanding, you get 15-foot setbacks on 3 sides of my property, which really squeezes you into the middle.
yeah.
You got 4 feet developable.
Unfortunately, a little more than that, but still that, when you get from 3 sides, it does really take a big chunk out of your usable land.
Location.
You two finance committee members, could I?
All right, so adjourned at 8:25.